Dr. Noha Abu Khatwa. Dr. Noha is an alumna of the AUC MA program in Islamic Art and Architecture of the class of 2001. She went on to earn a PhD from the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilization at the University of Toronto in 2017. The title of her dissertation was Calligraphers, Illuminators and Patrons, Mamluk Quran Manuscripts from 1341 to 1412 AD in light of the collection of the National Library of Egypt. In addition, Dr. Noha has worked at the Thesaurus Islamicus Foundation, where she directed the Dar al-Qutub manuscript conservation project. And she has also founded the Islamic Art Network, which aims to help and aid researchers and scholars in the field of Islamic art and architecture. Currently, she works at the Department of Arab and Islamic Studies. Today, she'll be speaking on the story of a Cairene calligrapher in Mamluk times.
Thank you very much. Well, if there's any problem with can you close the door? Is it possible to dim the light so that the images? If the images are not clear, we can, I think it's fine.
Yeah, it's clear.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you all for coming to attend this talk. I hope you'll find it interesting and be inspired at the end. I would like to thank the organizers of Qahwa and Kalam for inviting me to give this talk. Pascal, thank you very much. Amina, Dina, Marwa's not here. Thanks for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to be here to speak about one of my favorite artists of all time, a calligrapher who contributed a lot to the aesthetic scene of Cairo in the late 14th century and early 15th century, Abdurrahman ibn Sawyer. Is my voice clear, or should I put on the mic now?
Please put on the mic.
The first time I came across his name, Abdurrahman ibn Sawyer, was almost a decade ago when I was conducting the ground research for my PhD dissertation, which focused on Quran manuscripts produced during an episode in Mamluk history. My interest in Quran manuscripts was originally spurred by the thought that Quran calligraphy and illumination is the only form of Islamic art that is potentially greater than that of Islamic architecture, which is my prime passion and interest. The Quran is the most important aspect to Islam. It has the sacramental status of divine speech. This is why the calligrapher had to do his utmost best to properly present the word of God. Abdurrahman ibn Sawyer was certainly one of these calligraphers who excelled at such a presentation. You might be asking, why did I choose him specifically from amongst quite a few names we have for the Mamluk period? I did because he was the pillar and master of Arabic calligraphy, as I just mentioned, during the late years of the 14th century and the first half of the 15th century. I'm also an enthusiast for his works, and I've had the pleasure to see all his extant manuscripts in person, whose images do not pay any justice to the real thing. To really appreciate them, you need to see them in person. So the images are beautiful, but it's a completely different experience to see the manuscripts in person. Plus, the only time light was shed on this calligrapher was when the late historian Abdul Latif Ibrahim decided to publish an article about him in 1961 entitled Ibn Sawyer al-Khattat wa Madrasatihi. Since then, he was studied in the context of his treatise, once by the calligrapher and scholar Hilal Neji in 1981, and another time by Farouk Saad in 1997. On account of who Abdurrahman ibn Sawyer was, we have a rather delightful description of his legacy by another Mamluk calligrapher who lived a few decades after Ibn Sayyid. The early 16th century Egyptian calligrapher Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Tayyibi, quite a famed name, said the following of Ibn Sayyid, quote, "If you look at his writing, you would liken it to one of the flowers of the gardens of paradise, or to the jeweled necklaces adorning the young beautiful ones. Whomsoever follows his path is to be considered amongst the best of scribes, and whomsoever deviates from his path is ignorant, a failure, and an embarrassment to calligraphers. He will have no status or stature amongst them." End of quote. It is important to stress that Ibn Sayyid is the only one of his contemporaries to be described as such. Of course, other master calligraphers were commended, but no one as poetically. Ibn Sayyid was also a man who interacted and was associated with the elite of Cairo, as they commissioned him to produce their manuscripts and studied with him as well. He was a mentor for members of both the civil and religious elite. So who was Abdurrahman ibn Sayyid? His name was Abdurrahman ibn Yusuf, and he was the son of a goldsmith. His nisbah, al-Qahiri, the Cairean, since he was born, practiced his entire life in Cairo. He also acquired a second nisbah, al-Mukassib, which of course comes from his profession as a calligrapher. His exact birth date is unknown, but it is before 1368. Of quick wits, a humorous nature, and a high level of intelligence, he was a sagacious student of Quran recitation and poetry. It's most interesting that he received his lessons in recitation in the house of the Circassian Amir Yalbugh al-Salimi, one of the Amirs of Sultan Barqoq. The image you're looking at here is that of the palace of Bishtai, because Yalbugh al-Salimi this palace eventually became the residence for a few Amirs under the Circassian period, and Yalbugh al-Salimi resided in it. We know that from the sources. He signed on one of the walls. We don't have the signature anymore, but we know from the sources that he signed on one of the walls of this palace saying, "And the Mujawwid Abdurrahman ibn Yusuf al-Sayyid al-Mukattib." The word Mujawwid here, which he used to describe himself, while it can mean a professional Quran reciter, refers to his capacity as a calligrapher. The date of the lessons were noted by the historian al-Sakhawi in his biographical dictionary Al-Daw al-Lama, and also in his chronicle At-Tibr al-Masbooq, to have happened in the month of Safar, the year 1396. Ibn Sayyid was also reported by the sources to have been a Sufi. He was a Mutasawwif, who belonged to and resided and then frequented the oldest khanqa in Cairo, that of Sa'id al-Su'adi, the remains of which are in the northern part of the Jamaliya quarter. It's the first khanqa to be built by Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi back in the late 12th century. Abdurrahman's real predilection was for the studying and teaching of calligraphy. We know from the signatures he left in the manuscripts we possess today, and which we will shortly see, that he produced manuscripts for the first Circassian Mamluk Sultan, Barqoq, his son Sultan Faraj, ostensibly Sultan Barzbek, and their entourage. His caliber and skill aided in making him a royal calligrapher. Where he penned his manuscripts is a mystery. He never signed the place. A few calligraphers during that period would tell us of where they actually accomplished their work. Unfortunately, we don't know any of the locations. However, one cannot help but think of the khanqa of Sa'id al-Su'adi as one of these potential places. After having fallen ill for some time, he passed away in 1441. The question now is, how did he become the calligrapher that he was? Do we know anything related to his pedagogical background and practice? To answer this question, we need to go a bit back in time and figure out who his mentors were. But before going into his mentors, I would like to make a little detour. I'll be mentioning Nasakh, Muhaqqaq, and I'll be throwing a lot of names at you today. And for those of you who are not familiar with these scripts, please just look at these. That's just for you to appreciate the differences between the images. So now here on the left, these are from different Quran manuscripts. That's a typical refined Nasakh. Same words, typical refined Muhaqqaq. Nasakh is more known. Most of you must have heard about it before. Muhaqqaq, which was the supreme script of the 14th century, both in Mamluk and Al-Khalid rule for Quran calligraphy, is one of these majestic scripts that leave you with, you're going to see a lot of examples today, with this feeling of an overwhelming tidal force, or it has the majesty of a very long alif that towers like a minaret, contrasting with the letters that are beneath that go beneath the line in a shallow manner and in a sweeping motion. So it has this amazing effect that is very suitable for Quran manuscripts and was wonderfully used by both the Mamluks and the Al-Khanids, and it gave them also an advantage of producing monumental Qurans because it's a monumental script. And there are two different schools. There's the Al-Khanid school of calligraphy, which we're not getting into today, and there's the Egyptian school of Muhaqqaq, which Ibn Sa'd is a product of this school. That's here examples. On the right is an early 14th century Egyptian Muhaqqaq, and on the left is a 15th century Egyptian Muhaqqaq. You can see here clearly how it has this sweeping motion to it. These are huge manuscripts, by the way. Sweeping motion, very elongated alif, towers like a minaret. On the left is an Al-Khanid Muhaqqaq. We're not seeing anything Al-Khanid, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see the difference of how the Egyptian school of Muhaqqaq looks like and how the Al-Khanid one looks like. Now back to Ibn Sa'd after this little detour, and his mentors, his masters. Who were his masters? How did he become a master calligrapher? He's referred to by all the sources as a lover of the way of Ibn al-Afif, and they comment that he followed in the footsteps of this great early 14th century master. Who was this Ibn al-Afif then? He's a master of calligraphy whose only surviving work is a Quran manuscript in the National Library of Egypt that measures 49 by 38 centimeters, so it's not a monumental production, but the calligraphy is out of this world. It does show a very well-established calligrapher writing in Egyptian Muhaqqaq, characterized by the letters done in this sweeping motion. In the sources, he is referred to as Katib, Mujawwid, and Muharrir. He was also known as a poet and writer. He too, like Ibn Sa'd, was a Sufi, since his main vocation and position was the Sheikh of the Khanqa of Amir Aqbuga Abdul Wahid in the Southern Cemetery of Cairo. He taught calligraphy and scribed several Quran manuscripts. That's the only one that survives. Perhaps also in the Khanqa where he was in charge. He died in Cairo in 1336 at the age of 81. It's also interesting to note that Ibn al-Afif was referred to as Sheikh al-Kuttab al-Diyar al-Misriya, which means that he was considered and acknowledged as one of the heads or chiefs of practicing calligraphers in Egypt during his lifetime. Ibn Sa'd was not a contemporary of Ibn al-Afif, but he was rather taught the way of Ibn al-Afif by another calligrapher of Egypt, Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Ali Ziftawi, also known as Shamsuddin al-Ziftawi, who was another important link in the Egyptian chain of calligraphers, because this is how calligraphers are taught, through chains, and it's the chain and the silsila for the calligrapher that gives him the permission and the status to practice and teach. Al-Ziftawi was a calligrapher and a hadith scholar who died in 1403. He was deemed an expert on calligraphy with knowledge of all scripts, and he also wrote about calligraphy in a treatise he left us entitled Minhaj al-Isaba fi Awda' al-Kitaba. His students in calligraphy included renowned scholars of Balat and Hadith, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and al-Qalqashandi. Although not included in Ibn Sa'd's chain of transmission or silsila, Ibn Sa'd was also taught by Muhammad al-Umari al-Wasimi, al-Misri al-Mujawwid, who's a very important link in the Egyptian silsila of calligraphers, and was taught by a famed Damascene calligrapher. We don't have examples of the work, we just know a lot about them from the sources. His name was Shihab al-Din Ghazi. Having these great calligraphers as teachers enabled Ibn Sa'd to develop his own style, which combined elements from the Egyptian school and from the Syrian school. And I have to mention that Al-Sakhawi says his style is a Shami one. We really don't have a full explanation of what the Shami style is. We know very well the Egyptian school, the Al-Khani school, because of Yaqut al-Mustasimi and his 6 students. But this needs further research and investigation into Quran manuscripts produced in Damascus. Now, Ibn al-Sayyid, like his master, Ziftawi, wrote about calligraphy. So he didn't just practice, he also taught, and he wrote about the methods and about the ethics that come along with the craft. He left us theory on the subject, very, very interesting treatise. It has two titles, تحفة أولي الألباب في صناعة الخط والكتاب, or رسالة في الخط وبني القلم. And it's been published twice so far, once by the calligrapher Hilal Neji and another by Farouk Saad. The treatise begins with a review of the importance of calligraphy and writing, followed by a history of the origins of the Arabic language. Then he discusses the theory that Kufi is the origin of Arabic scripts, but also adds that Nasr might have been another source that existed side by side with Kufi. After this historical foundation, he goes on to discuss the different scripts and their developments, and provides a who's who in the world of Arabic calligraphy, which includes, amongst others, of course, Ibn Muqla brothers, Ibn al-Bawwab, and Yaqut al-Mustasim. He then proceeds to inform his readers of the technicalities of preparing and holding the pen, as per the instructions of Ibn Abi. I don't know why this is not very clear. And the person who drew it for me, she was supposed to be here. I'd like to thank her anyways. She's my niece, and she's an MA student in architecture. She drew this. It's an adaptation from Nassar Mansour's pictures in his brilliant book about the script Muhaqqaq. Nassar Mansour is a scholar and a calligrapher as well. And they were images, and she redrew them. I hope they're clear enough to pinpoint a few things. Now, the first step that Ibn al-Sayyid mentions, it's mentioned in many treatises, not just by Ibn al-Sayyid, but Ibn al-Sayyid has a specific order to how he does things. Is the fath. Is this one. Fath or opening. I always have this horrible students know. Here, the fath or the opening of the reed happens at the very thin end, and that opening, he mentions, has to be as long as the pigeon's beak, or the second phalanx of the thumb. Then comes the splitting, a shaq, which is right here, this one. You split the nib, and it's done vertically in the middle. Ibn Afif has taught that the split, if it's long, the script will be thinner than if the script is short. A short split would make the script thick and strong, and the ink heavier. Then comes the carving or the naht, which is not clear here, of the pen, which consists of two steps: carving the sides of the pen and carving the inside. The sides of the pen have to be carved in equal amounts. It should look like a sword. He says, اجعلهما مسيفين. This is to make the ink flow, even if the ink has been kept in the pen for some time. The last step he describes is al-qat. Al-qat, or cutting the nib of the pen, is a critical stage, and there are several angles to be used in executing it. There's the muharraf, where it's very angled. There's also the mustawi or the mudawwar, which almost, it's not straight, but it's almost there. And then you have the qa'im, which is an intermediate angle. This doesn't show how it's cut, but it shows you like the different angles the end of the reed can look like. Ibn al-Sayyid dislikes a nib that is either too muharraf or too mustawi. He prefers one in the middle and quotes an earlier calligrapher by the name of Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Barbari to support his choice. He states later, however, that the best is a moderate tahrif. Now, the importance of cutting this nib have to do with which script you are trying to accomplish. So, for instance, if you are doing raq'a or nasr, you need more of a straight nib or a very low angle than if you're doing muhaqqaq, for instance, or thuluth, where the angle has to be a little sharper. And calligraphers sometimes in these treatises, they make fun of each other. This calligrapher used this only one nib for everything, so this is why he was good at nasr, but he was really horrible at muhaqqaq. They comment a lot about this. After finishing his explanation of how to cut your reed pen, he goes into the description of the different letters, the geometry, along with the vocalization, the issue of tongues, depending on the different scripts. Letter proportions and sizes are also handled. While this treatise is a general calligraphy, when compared to that written by his master Ziftawi, if you remember I mentioned Ziftawi early on, it seems to lack a bit of technical details. I personally have found Ziftawi's Minhaj al-Isaba to be clearer and richer in descriptions, which rendered it more useful for a beginner. I'm not a calligrapher. I didn't attempt to be one. I appreciate calligraphy and I study how medieval calligraphers work. And for me, to sit and read the Minhaj was a much easier job. It was something, it explained better to me. Of course, Ibn Sayyid's treatise is excellent, but I would suppose for established calligraphers it would be easier than for someone like myself. Now it's finally time to get to enjoy his work. So far you haven't really seen what he's produced. This manuscript was made waqf by the Circassian Sultan Barqub, who wanted to vie very much so with the previous Bahri Sultans by commissioning a monumental codex. It's huge, 105 by 61 centimeters. It consists of 255 heavily restored folios and was penned in the great script of the period, black muhaqqa, 11 lines per page. Ibn al-Sayyid produced it in 1399, and his very curious colophon reads, I would like to read you the colophon because it's really one of a kind. I haven't seen a colophon written as such. He says, the poor slave of God Almighty, Abdurrahman ibn al-Sayyid, who is thankful to God for all his blessings, and who believes and prays for our Lord the Prophet Muhammad and his family and companions, and his good and pure kin, and relents with deep submission, was honored with writing this noble mushaf. So far, this is standard. He continues, the viewer of this noble mushaf should know that God Almighty has aided me to write it in one pen, in 60 days and nothing less. Thanks and gratitude be to God. Its completion coincided with the inundation of the Blessed Nile on the 6th of Dhul Hijjah, the year 801. And the reason behind the making of this noble mushaf was the poor slave to the mercy of his bountiful God, Muhammad ibn al-Mattut, the Damascene, the one from the town of Salahiyya. May God forgive him and his parents and all Muslims. This gives a lot of information. I wish he had told us where he produced the manuscript. He gives, of course it's not, I haven't seen this a lot, that they would, in a colophon, would be quoting that it was with the inundation of the Nile. But when you read the sources, this is very important, mentioning the inundation, which was, of course, in August. The year 1399 was the year. And it continues a tradition in the sources. And the other curious part was mentioning that the reason behind that mushaf was Muhammad ibn Battuta al-Dimashqi. Now, this manuscript is a colossal production and it's a waqf by Sultan Barqub. It needs a royal patron. Who was this Ibn Battuta? I've been trying to find him. I couldn't. So any Mamlukists here, if you come across this name, please do let me know. Because I've searched and maybe there's still more sources that I have to cover, but I can't find him. That he is mentioned as the reason behind the codex does not mean he commissioned it. He must have been the inspiration behind the work. Or, most probably, I believe, is the person who put Ibn Sayyid in touch with Sultan Barqub. As can be seen here, the hand of a master calligrapher is at work. In his treatise, he stresses the importance of keeping a steady and proportionate hand, and he certainly applies it to himself. Ibn al-Sayyid managed on a very large scale to control muhaqqaq and not to lose the balance or the proportion of neither the words nor the letters. He interchanges the different forms of the letter kaf comfortably, and often all the letters and proportions show a master of Egyptian muhaqqaq, and that last line on the folio depicted shows when the waw and the ra and the final meme follow each other in that sweeping motion typical of the Egyptian methods. And by mentioning in his colophon one pen, he most probably means one script, that of muhaqqaq. He doesn't literally mean it's one big pen. It's useful to compare his writing with that of another Egyptian calligrapher, Muhammad al-Shahriri, who operated a bit earlier. He's a calligrapher of another manuscript in the National Library of Egypt. It's roughly of the same size, so it's another colossal production. And when compared to Ibn Sayyid, here on the right, you can see Ibn Sayyid's mastery. Even though Shahriri's hand is very good, and when you examine them in real life, you can see how sometimes the ink, where the ink thins, where the letters are not keep their proportions anymore. And take my word for it, Ibn Sayyid's production was actually of a much higher level, because he did teach and practice and was commended for always keeping this the balanced line. While this masterpiece was made waqf by the one on the right, Sultan Barqub, this one was made waqf by Sultan Faraj ibn Barqub. It's also kept in the National Library of Egypt and was finished by Abdurrahman ibn Sayyid in 1411. In order to produce great works of art, Faraj, the new Sultan, had to continue sponsoring the calligraphers that his father sponsored. Reason being that the process of becoming a master calligrapher or an illuminator was laborious and necessitated time and dedication. To acquire mastery in such a craft, one had to operate for years, and patronage of the elite certainly helped and facilitated it. It was easier for Faraj to sustain what his father had established or maintained than creating a new thing or sponsoring new calligraphers. This manuscript is of 252 folios. It measures 95 by 73 centimeters, penned in black muhakkak, also 11 lines per page, colossal production. And once again, Ibn Sari impresses us with his very sure hand. His muhakkak, as seen earlier in Rasid 11, is still balanced and proportionate. There's a difference of 12 years in the execution of both manuscripts, and the script is exactly the same. Moving to another manuscript, not in Egypt, in the Chester Beatty Library, lies another manuscript of his. Compared to the previous two Quran manuscripts, this one is small. It measures 35 by 18 centimeters and was written in a beautiful nasakh. 11 lines to a page, while the surah titles are in a red tawqiyah. Ibn Sayyid penned it for an Amir this time, Faris al-Saqi al-Khazindar, in 1411. Faris ibn Abdullah al-Saqi al-Khazindar al-Nasri was one of the Amirs of Sultan Faraj. He was most probably a eunuch from Anatolia who reached his highest position Khazindar under Faraj and remained as such under the Sultanate of Al-Mu'ayyad. He was also a trained calligrapher who was taught by none other than Abdurrahman ibn Sayyid, and a good reciter of the Quran who studied Quran recitation with Abdurrahman ibn Sayyid in the palace of Al-Mubassali. As part of the royal entourage of Faraj and as a friend of ibn Sayyid, Faris gives us another link between the Sultan and the calligrapher. The manuscript commissioned by Faris shows Ibn Sayyid's amazing skill in another script, that of Nasakh, not Muhakkak. It really ushers the triumph of Nasakh as a main script for the Quran in the 15th century, thus gradually replacing Muhakkak as the established script of the period. I just need another detour. Muhakkak was the prime Quran, it's the default script for Quran manuscripts. Nasakh was of course being used throughout the centuries, but Nasakh gained this importance in the 15th century and in the late decades of the 15th century, and eventually of course with the Ottomans, that it replaced almost all other scripts. In Egypt, there's also, I don't want to get into other scripts you haven't seen today, but Nasakh becomes the main script, and I believe that Ibn Sayyid helped in this to happen, because there's always this curious and mysterious, not documented in the sources, alluded to, link between Ibn Sayyid and the Ottoman school of calligraphy. And for those of you who are not familiar with calligraphy schools, Egypt, the land ruled by the Al-Khanids, Iran, Egypt and Syria, the Mamluks, the Al-Khanids, they had, under their rule, you had the two main chains of transmission. All of this ends, as far as Egypt is concerned, with the Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517. And the calligraphy world moves to Istanbul. There has to be a link with the Egyptian chain. It hasn't been documented, but there has to be a link. And I believe that Ibn Sayyid must have, he died of course decades before that Ottoman conquest, but as you will see, his students continued his legacy, and it's through his work on Nasakh that then we get the great Nasakh schools that are now they actually still survive in the Turkish world. I'd like to show you a comparison with another 15th century manuscript also in Nasakh, so that you appreciate his skill. If you look at the basmalas, you will see this manuscript here was commissioned by Bey. It's also in Dar al-Kutub. How he has, I know the condition of his manuscript is not that great, but try to compare the two basmalas in this case. Another manuscript of his can be found in Azhar Library. This manuscript is not as impressive as what we have so far seen on account of its condition. but it shows the master of Muhaqqaq at work. It's not colossal. He finished it in 1423 and informs us in the colophon that he copied it from a Quran manuscript that was penned by Ibn Murhaf. Again, that's another name I couldn't find. If anyone happens to bump into Ibn Murhaf, let me know. I'm assuming he's a calligrapher, or potentially a calligrapher slash Sufi sheikh that Ibn al-Sayr had the pleasure of being with, and it's out of his blessings that he's copying a manuscript that this Ibn Murhaf had scribed. We don't have the example, we just have the colophon where Ibn al-Sayr says, I'm copying Ibn Murhaf. He also wrote it with 11 lines to a page, and the size is a small one like that in the Chester Beatty Library. He didn't just leave us Quran manuscripts. The last manuscript I'm showing you of his today, from amongst the 5, is a poem. Also in the National Library of Egypt. It's a very impressive production which came to be in the possession of a great patron of the arts, Sultan al-Ashraf Bey. Ibn al-Sayr produced this beautiful manuscript of the renowned panegyric written for the Prophet in the early Mamluk period, the Burda of Imam al-Busayri. It is actually an expansion of the poem. The Burda was written by Imam al-Busayri in the late 13th century, and he was patronized by a big family in Egypt. He produced the Burda, which was based on a dream he had of the Prophet, and then poets took the Burda and did what they call a takhmis, or so they take a line that al-Busayri wrote and then add other lines to it. It's an expansion. I'm simplifying things too much, but you take the original and you work with it, and you keep it you keep it safe as well. This manuscript, which is it's a takhmis of the Burda, shows off in style, and it shows off his skill by displaying 3 scripts in a page. They did this quite often with poetry, with Quran manuscripts. Under Mamluk rule, the calligraphers didn't like this, which is very understandable. In Iran, they exchanged. You would have one line in Nasr and one in Rayhan, or one in Muhaqqaq and one in Rayhan. Under Mamluk rule, this didn't happen, which makes more sense, because when you are scribing the Quran, you want things to be clear, and it's a standard whereby you're not exchanging the scripts, show off the skill of the calligrapher, but take away a bit from what you're looking at as a total. Now here you have Nas. You have Nas, Turq, and Rayhan. Rayhan is a diminutive of Muhaqqaq, so it's Muhaqqaq but on a smaller scale. In this example, he is imitating his own master al-Ziftawi. The only manuscript surviving in the name of al-Ziftawi is a takhmis of the Burda, penned in 1381, and is now kept in the Special Collections Library in the University of Michigan. Ziftawi's Burda uses Nasr, Thuluth, and Tawtiya. Nasr is right here. Thuluth and Tawtiya, and no Rayhan. And I don't know, you can judge for yourselves which is the best. They're both amazing, but you can in my opinion, see that the student has surpassed his master, and his production is a finer one. Both are amazing, but I think Ibn al-Sayr does a better job even when you compare the same scripts. Now, Abd al-Rahman al-Sayr had a legacy, and this legacy was prolonged and kept alive by his students. How do we know his students? We know from the sources, and it's really al-Sakhawi's biographical dictionary, that is replete with names of artists who were trained by Abd al-Rahman al-Sayr. We need to find the manuscripts of these artists at some point. He taught in many schools simultaneously, and had many students who continued being calligraphers, and those who received calligraphy lessons but specialized in other fields. He taught the Amir Faris al-Khazandar and the renowned historians and hadith scholars al-Sakhawi and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, as well as al-Sakhawi's father and uncle, Other students include Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Zaifini. He's a Syrian Shafi'i scholar who settled in Cairo, studied Arabic jurisprudence, specialized in the Quran, excelled so much in calligraphy that Ibn al-Sayyid gave him an ijazah or permitted him to teach calligraphy. He stayed in Cairo teaching calligraphy under the instructions of his master, passed away in Cairo and was buried next to his master. Another student also permitted by Ibn Sayyid to teach was Muhammad al-Qayyumi al-Qahiri, who eventually became the calligraphy teacher in the complex of Sultan Barqub, one of the most important institutions of the period. A few illuminators were also Ibn Sayyid's students. Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Ibiyad al-Qahiri was an illuminator and a binder, renowned for specializing in mixing colors, and he studied with Ibn Sayyid. He also became a master calligrapher in addition to being an illuminator, and of course many of the calligraphers were illuminators as well, not all of them. Muhammad ibn Shams al-Azraqi is another famous calligrapher who was an illuminator and was given permission to teach by the master as well. There are other names, more names, but what I need to do now is find the manuscripts. To sum up, one cannot overstate Ibn Sayyid's importance. He instituted his own way in scribing on a monumental scale in Quran manuscripts. He deviated a little bit from the straight rigorous Egyptian muhaqqa, but that's because he was tweaking it a bit. He taught so many of the leading names of the 15th century, and he contributed to the evolution of Nasr as a leading script of the period. His circle was that of the elite, the intellectual elite and the ruling elite. He taught and probably socialized with religious scholars like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and the family of the historian Sakhawi. He had connections to the upper class. We know through 3 different sultans whom he dealt with. He studied in the house of an Amir, taught Amirs, and all of this places him within the high echelons of the social elites in Maghreb society. One more thing, and I'm done before we leave, but I have to leave you with this thought. Besides his story, and he's a great calligrapher, you've seen a lot of manuscripts, because today I've spoken a lot about manuscripts and I've shown a few as well. Please always keep in mind that all Islamic manuscripts, and not just the ones seen here today, they contain the artistic and intellectual patrimony of the eras in which they were produced. And as such, they're priceless and irreplaceable. As was clear today, they are also rich with the lives of those who produced them, because sometimes you get the names in these artistic productions and you have nothing in the sources. Sometimes you have stuff in the sources that complement, so it's like a puzzle. And detailed examination is really of crucial importance to many disciplines. And I hope that more and more manuscript collections will be readily available to for scholars to study and to present. And one of the most important projects happening right now in Cairo, and I'm very happy that the director of the project is here with us, Ms. Anna Beni, and part of the team as well. They are currently in Dar al-Kutub preserving what you've seen here today, and thousands more. And more of these efforts are needed. Otherwise, the manuscript collections in most of our parts of the world are going to be a goodbye story, because it's a completely different deal when you have to deal with Western libraries keeping Islamic manuscripts. You actually can deal with the manuscript. You're allowed to study it and make it available for the people to see. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, there will be an exhibition soon in Dar al-Kutub that they're curating at the moment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noah, for this very interesting talk. So I'm sure you all have lots of questions. Should we pass around the microphone? So, any questions?
Thank you very much. Fascinating. Particularly when you showed us the images of the craft of making the pens, that sort of practical, technical aspect of a lot of what we see in the research can sometimes get lost. Can you, and particularly when you talked about the colophon where he says this was written with one pen, I couldn't help but think, well, why couldn't it have been? You said it was probably referring to it was done in one script, but can you maybe illuminate for us a little bit about the technical craft, about what it takes to, how long, how slowly do they write, what was the longevity of some of the materials? Is this stuff that we know, or can you tell us just a little bit about it?
We don't know a lot of details, but there's some information that we have kept in the treatises, and some other information from like current modern day calligraphers who still practice in the same manner as these medieval calligraphers. The reason I thought that it most probably meant muhaqqaq is that these pens, of course, they do survive for some time. You don't just use it once and you get rid of it. But it's the taking care of it and that he finished it in 60 days that made me think he must have meant muhaqqaq, and he used several ones. Because when you read the details of how you should keep the pen and in which box it has to be kept, and the maqat that you use to cut the nib of the pen, it has to be either ivory or ebony to keep a sharp edge and help in the longevity of that pen. If you use something else, it will break it apart. There's a lot of these technical details. If you keep to them, your tools will survive. When you don't, they always criticize, oh, you're not a good calligrapher. But it's because he also gives 60 days. Each calligrapher has his own pace. They don't all finish in the same period of time. But 60 days for this colossal production is quite fast.
Amina?
Oh, sorry. And there's a question.
Thank you. This is really, really interesting. My question is about the monuments themselves of the era, and when we see all the calligraphy on the walls and on the facades of mosques or other types of monuments, are they usually those same prominent calligraphers that are responsible for this, or is it a completely different skill?
I've always imagined that they did participate. We have a few examples. I can't say that someone like Ibn Sayyid have participated, but I'm one of those who believe that what you see on the monuments in terms of decoration and calligraphy was originally on paper by these calligraphers. But you need the proof for that, and the proof survived in an example in the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, where you get the signature Muhammad ibn Bayti al-Muhsini with that beautiful big inscription band in the Qibla Iwan inside the Hanafi Madrasa. And he refers to himself as Shad al-Amair. He's in charge of the constructions of the Sultan, and there's quite a few about him in the sources. He's an example of someone. He's a calligrapher who left us a Quran manuscript. It's now in London in the Nasr Khalil collection. He had his signature. He illuminated it. He calligraphed it. He also left us a signature inside the building that he katabahu. He's the one in charge, he's the one responsible for that beautiful inscription inside Sultan Hassan. And at the same time, this is all complemented by the sources being heavily invested in him, since he was very close to the Sultan. He was Shad al-Amair, the one in charge of all the construction projects in the country. Very important Amir from what Mamluks know as Awlad al-Nas category. And he was sent by Sultan Hassan all around the Muslim world, and especially North Africa, to inspect buildings and roads. So you have a full picture of this Muhammad ibn Bayti al-Muhsini. He is a great calligrapher, he is an important Mamluk dignitary, and he's also potentially an architect, one of those architects responsible for the building. But he's an exception that we have all of this information about him. But it does tell you that many of that work, many of these calligraphers, they must have also used their work on buildings. We have examples for Turkey and for Iran. And for Turkey, for instance, the great Hamdallah and his connections to Bayezid and the complex of Bayezid. But this was the only example I have. But I do believe they interacted with the buildings as well.
Actually, there are 2 points on my mind. One of them is a question, the other one is a clarification. I didn't really get the part you mentioned about taking a line of his and then adding to them like 5.
Oh, the takhmis?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the first.
Oh, okay. Let me tell you this. Okay, the takhmis basically you have the original poem, so you use the first verse, and then of the original poet, and then you add your own, using the same meter, because with poetry you have to keep to the meter and using, and it's a panegyric written for the Prophet as well. So using the same terminology, same meter, come up with your own verses.
Okay.
And then you use another line from the original poet, and then you come up with your own.
Okay, so that's really clarification. The question is, whenever I read the verse in the Quran, for example, I see 2 types or 3, maybe 4 kinds of ways that meme, the letter meme, could be written. I don't know if that's the case here or not. I don't know. I'm just having this on my mind.
Like in the different words.
Yeah. What determines whether the meme should be written like that or like that? Like if it's written like that or.
It's the calligrapher. Like with how he interchanged, how he used the kaf. This is what I highlighted, like the kaf. It's his own. It's how he is going to scribe or pen the verse. He decides.
Okay, so
it's not, as far as I know, it's not technicality within, because this is the letter, not the vocalization or the tajweed markers, which are not the calligrapher applies them, but it's if he's a Quran scholar as well, he will he will have a take on it. But the letters themselves, it's his choice.
For example, his students, like when they were writing, would they stick to the same meme when they're writing the very same word, or every one of them?
For a very long time, they will, until they become master calligraphers. This is how traditional training is. You have to follow your master until your master tells you you're good enough to take off on your own. But they start how they train within that workshop is they start by doing the most menial of things and preparing the ink and learning step by step for years and years and years.
Okay.
So they follow him until he allows them otherwise.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
This is off topic, but can you tell us what Awlad al-Nas are?
Yes.
The category, I'm sorry.
I've tortured my students with Awlad al-Nas. I keep referring to them a lot. I'm a fan of this category. Basically, under Mamluk rule, the elite were the Mamluks. So you can say the Sultan and the veteran emirs. The emirs who say you've heard of Bibas al-Muhtari, Qalawun. These are the top of your social class. Now, they've had children, and all their emirs had children. Sultans, the emirs, they gave birth to many. That category became Awlad al-Nas, and they were less than the original. They were not bought Mamluks who had to enter a system of training, get manumitted, and then be given a title. They were born free. So they're less in status than their fathers, and yet they're high up in the social class. In the very beginning of Mamluk rule, and Amina can explain this better than me, they were not allowed to join higher levels of the army. They only participated in the halqa, in the infantry level. Later on, when you had sultans who objected to the sultans who themselves were Awlad al-Nas, like Sultan Hassan, Nasr, Muhammad al-Qarun, they elevated Awlad al-Nas. They mostly intermarried with the religious class. They were calligraphers, they were scholars, they were intellectual producers, more or less, more than military figures.
Any other questions? Okay, then I have a question upon actually. What do we know, and I didn't quite understand this from your talk, and I was hoping to remember it. What are the reasons for sort of the growing preference for Nasr? Is it simply the Ottoman preference, the Ottomans start preferring this, or do we know what the reasons were?
We don't know the exact reason, but we're assuming it's more practical. Nas, because with the Ottomans you get smaller Qurans, and even we still get monumental productions under Qaitbay here in Cairo and in Muhaqqaq. Qaitbay is exceptional. It's more practical and it helps you produce smaller Qurans. And of course the Ottomans being great patrons of Nasr, but it's a practicality issue. That we assume.
Any other questions at that stage? Okay, then I would like Dr. Noah very much again for this talk, for this very interesting talk. And